Hey everybody, today I want to talk to you about the windows that I'm going to be putting into my shed. I got these windows from somebody secondhand on Craigslist. I actually paid $10 for the pair, not $10 each, 10 bucks, both windows. Now they're not great windows. The frames are plastic and broken. It's part of why I got them for 10 bucks, but the glass is good. So what I'm planning to do is to take all the frames off of them and build my own and reuse the glass.
So as you can see looking at the window from the side, it is a double paned window. It's a completely sealed system, but the plastic of the frame is very beat up. You can see it's been painted a few times. Several of the screw holes are completely missing screws, and the frame is cracked in a few places. But that's not the worst problem. The bigger problem is that there's no good way to mount it into the shed. So I'm just going to completely remove this frame, save the glass, and then build my own frame that is custom fit to the shed. And that should fit perfectly. So there are still a couple of screws left in this frame, and all I have to do to take these frames apart is to remove those screws.
See if we can wiggle this free here. Comes right off.
Okay, so I've removed one side of the frame, and when I did so, I noticed that on this underside there seems to be some caulk that is sticking that side of the frame to the glass. So you can see as I pull this apart, it's really sticky and it seems like it never really fully cured. Ew. So I don't really have any good ideas for how to get this caulk off. I think scraping it with the Razorblade is probably what I'm going to have to do, but I have a few chemicals I want to try first. Before I get into that, let's make sure we get both frames disassembled. I tried acetone first and it did not have any effect at all. And then I remembered I have this stuff called Prep-All that I used on a painting job a couple of years ago.
Let's see what this thing does here. Danger, danger, danger. There's lots of danger warnings on it. So it's probably pretty nasty stuff. Designed for application by trained professionals. Sure.
I tested the Prep-All on one small area and it did seem to dissolve the caulk, but it was taking quite a long time to do it. So I grabbed a putty knife and used that to scrape off as much of the caulk as I could. This was substantially easier than I expected it would be. The caulk was a sticky, gooey, nasty mess, but this knife did a great job of scraping it off. It did leave just a little bit of residue, but that residue was easy to completely remove with the Prep-All. And I do want to point out this video is not sponsored in any way by any company or any product. So anything that I happen to mention is just strictly what I used, either because I had it on hand or I found that it did a good job. You can see here in this series of sped up shots that the Prep-All dissolves the caulk pretty quickly. So after I got all the caulk off, there was still this white substance on the glass. I decided this must be paint that was left over from a poor masking job when they painted the frames. And paint usually comes right off of the Razorblade, and in this case that's exactly what worked the best. So there was one other issue with the glass, and that was at the corners, the black sealant that was used to fuse the two panes of glass together had kind of squeezed out beyond the edges of the glass. Now my plan for the frame that I'm going to build is going to require that the glass is completely flush around all four sides, so I just trimmed this off with the Razorblade. So now that the glass has all of the extra junk removed from it, there was a film that was left over from the Prep-All and all of the other cleaning that I did, and I just used regular glass cleaner to clean that up. So far I'd only been working on one side of each window, so before I flip them over onto my dirty table, I'm going to put down some clean cloths to keep the glass clean. And then I went through the same surface prep steps on the back that I did on the front. So you may have noticed that the glass cleaner that I'm using is not your standard blue stuff in a squeezy bottle. This is the kind of glass cleaner that I prefer, and I just get it at my local supermarket. The reason that I prefer this kind is because No matter how hard I try, it never leaves any streaks.
Alright, so that's it for the prep work on the glass. I've removed them from the old frames, I've cleaned all the schmutz and schmutz off there. I've got them ready to build the new frames, which I'm going to be doing out of PVC trim pieces that I got from my local big box store. And I chose PVC specifically because it will not expand, it will not rot. You don't have to paint it over and over and over again. It should last the duration that the shed is going to last. And so I'm just going to be making a plain box that these are going to go into with small trim pieces to go right up against the glass to secure the glass inside the frame. So let's start that process next.
Since I'm going to be building a custom frame, I needed to start with very carefully measuring exactly how long the glass is. Luckily, these two panes were precisely the same length.
So I'm just checking to make sure that my measurements were good and that the glass is going to fit inside that. I'm cutting 45s on the corners. So I'll cut a bottom like I've cut here, an exact replica of that for the top, and then two sides. And that's going to form a nice box for the glass to sit inside. Then I've got some smaller pieces of trim that I'm going to use down near the bottom of the glass and up along the top of the glass on both sides of it to sandwich it. And that's going to be what holds it inside the window frame itself. I'll show you each step of the process as I go.
Since I know that both windows are exactly the same length, all I needed to do was cut out 3 more of the long sides exactly the same way as the first. Once that was finished, I carefully measured the short sides of both windows and cut out pieces for those as well. Then did a quick test fit to make sure everything was looking good, and proceeded to cut out all of my inner trim pieces. Once all my pieces were cut, I used 4 of the small cutoffs as spacers and clamped them down to the side of the first long piece. Then I applied glue to the back of the first piece of trim, as well as along the long side of the window frame, and then flipped that piece of trim over onto the glue and clamped it down against my spacers. This ensured that this trim piece is going to be straight and evenly spaced throughout the entire length. Now this is just PVC material, so you can use regular PVC glue for it, which is especially nice because it cures very quickly. I made sure to put a liberal amount of glue on both the piece of trim and the outer side of the window, and then clamped or held them together long enough to start to set up, and then used my small brad nailer to lock them down. Note that I'm only gluing in the front piece of trim, the one that's going to be out towards the outside of the shed. The rear piece of trim that's going to go in against the window, I'm going to be screwing in, and I'm doing it that way in case I ever need to replace this glass. I don't want to have these frames completely all glued together. This way, removing the glass is as simple as taking out the screws on the rear pieces of trim, pulling out the glass and replacing it with something new. Once the trim pieces were all finished being glued together, I was ready to assemble the frame. I used the same process, first using a lot of PVC glue in the joint, and then following it up with the brad nailer. Then a quick test fit to make sure that the window was going to fit in there nice, and threw on a couple of extra clamps just for good measure while the glue cured. The next day it was time to install the glass permanently. I ran this white silicone sealant along the joint where the trim meets the window. Now I'm using this both to make the joint look nicer and to make it waterproof. And again, I'm not endorsing this particular kind, I'm not sponsored by anybody in this video. Any kind of a white silicone sealant should work fine for this application. After I ran the bead, I just used my finger to smooth it out into the crack. Now these are the screws I'm going to be using to install the rear trim behind the glass, but they're just a little bit too long. So I used my bench grinder to shorten the screws by about a 1/4 inch or so, and then also rounding them over to a nice sharp point again. Next I pre-drilled all the holes in my trim, and I was almost ready for final assembly. I remembered at this point that I wanted to paint the outside of the frames white with a good high-grade exterior paint. This will help protect the PVC from any kind of damage from the sunlight. And it's going to perfectly match the white that was used on the trim of my house. Which in my case is important because my HOA has got these really strict rules about the colors that I'm allowed to use on my shed. I knew it would be a lot easier to paint this before the glass was in it, so that's why I'm doing it now. Once the paint had completely dried, it was time to install the glass. Before doing so, I ran a bead of clear silicone all along the inner edge of that first piece of trim. This is going to help make the glass stick into the window better and provide a waterproof seal. I was pretty liberal with this bead, which caused a little bit of squeeze out, and you'll see how I dealt with that in just a little while. Once I had the bead of silicone ready to go, just drop the window on top and press it down firmly. I applied some clamps just to make sure that the edges stayed nice and straight. Then I laid in all of the remaining pieces of trim and screwed them down. The next day, after the silicone had finished curing completely, I just used a razor blade to run along the edge of that silicone and slice it off. This provided a nice clean cut and a good clean trim. Here's all the pieces of squeeze out that I cut off. There was quite a bit of it. Then I did one more quick cleaning of the windows and they were done. This project is finished. I'm really pleased with how these windows turned out. I don't have any idea how old the glass is, but it looks good. There was one small little scratch on one side of one of them, but it's hardly noticeable, especially in a shed window. But I love the clean look, and I can't wait to get them installed. So hey, thanks for checking out this video. I hope you've learned something or been slightly entertained. If you did, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button, I'd sure appreciate it. And if you're so inclined, you can also subscribe and click that little bell icon to get notified whenever I post a new video. But no pressure. And as a quick recap, here's the new windows along with the old frames. I think the new ones are a huge improvement and I can't wait to get them installed in the new shed. Well, that's it. We'll see you next time.